The following is a paid program and does not necessarily reflect the views or ideas of the staff or management of KWSH or the 110 Broadcast Group.
Testing. Good morning. It's Jay, Child Chifkados, Bo White Killer here. Or Bo White Killer, Child Chifkados. How's everybody doing today? Hope everybody's doing today good. I've got a special guest today. Guests we have in studio. Pretty cool today. We're always trying to surprise everybody and let everybody know that we've got illustrious guests coming through our area. Our most honored guest today comes all the way from Wisconsin. That's over there by Wewoka, I think. I'm not really sure. By Shawnee, somewhere out that way. But we got Mr. Gary J. Montana and his daughter in the studio. Gary's a Lakota from Standing Rock. A brother, and he's an attorney at law. And so we saw and met him last night at the Band Chiefs meeting. And we scooped him up. He's in town for a Tribal Historic Preservation Office conference, kind of some guidance and some informational experiences he's sharing with our group, David Frank and the gang at Seminole State. So we're welcoming him here into the studio today.
Okay, thank you.
And as we begin to get today's program, we're going to start with a moment of silence and lifting up our relatives that have walked on and families that continue to this earth's journey. We include a couple of prayer requests also, too, during this moment of silence sent to our office this morning. Mr. Billy Ray Smith and Joyce Bear. We just offer a moment of silence of healing and peace. All right. Okay, Gary, well, I got some birthday shout-outs. I'm going to get out real quick some of our people. And we want to give some shout-outs to Keaton Esselstrom, who's Keaton Esselstrom studying to be an attorney. Bobby Beals, Kevin Jones, Billy Charlene Jackson, Darlene Schaefer, Catherine Harjo, Katie Isaacs, Kay Northhurst, Mahaley Jasna, the twins, Marissa and Lauren Coker, Woodco Long over there. Woo, Woodco, Joshua Kuhn, Ethan Burgess, AJ Foster, Jessica Powell, our resident recruiter, Staff Sergeant Tennyson T-Bone Kirchie, Buffalo Hill, way down there in Florida, Gary McInturf, Quentin Cypress, over there in Creekland, Jason Salzman, and of course, Mr. Stace Harjo. We hope you all enjoy that Earth rotation feel. Happy birthday, y'all. A couple quick things. Do you guys have any birthdays y'all want to shout out? Any birthdays? Not yet?
Not me.
Not you? Okay. Nothing. I know just past coming on the way up here to the radio station, I want to make a shout out to the job fair that's going on at the Reynolds Wellness Center. It started at 10 today. Seminole Nation Human Resources will be there. There's a number of jobs listed, so you can go to our website, www.sno-nsn.gov. Check out the career listings at the top of the page. But if you go to the Reynolds Wellness Center today, you'll see Angela out there. And I believe the event's going to be closing at 4 today. So dust off your tie and your shoes. And if you're looking for a great place to make a positive difference to work in the Seminole Nation hemisphere, go to see Angela at the Reynolds Wellness Center today. Also tonight, an online Zoom meeting at 7 p.m. from 7 to 8:30. 7 to 8:30. Muskogee language will be used at the table is the title. Muskogee language used at the table will be taught by Mr. Ben Yahola. It's an intermediate level conversational Muskogee language course, so that'll be tonight at Zoom. It's a Facebook group, Muskogee, and you must be a member to chime in on it. So if you want information onto it, go to our tribal Facebook page, Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, and I have a link there posted for it. So that's tonight if you want to be if you want to learn how to get that food passed across the table. It's about 19 days till the July 10th Seminole Nation elections. Again, 19 days to July 10th Seminole Nation elections. The general election absentee ballot period was closed on June 10th. Election Board Chairman Dr. Stephanie Beals reports that absentee ballot requests exceeded the number of past elections. She said that it's unknown at this time whether we'll have a large voter turnout this election or whether members are opting to vote via absentee ballot due to the conditions brought on by COVID. The general election for the previous election had approximately 1,200 voters who turned out to cast their vote in 2017. Currently, there are 15,894 eligible voters. 15,000, and we had 1,200 votes last election. And we currently have 18,636 tribal members. And that's according to Director of Tribal Enrollment, Shirley Walker. So, that'll be probably a topic to come up here shortly. Again, our voting places are Sasakwa Community Building, Strother Community Building, North Community Building, Crooked Oak Public Schools, and Shawnee Middle Schools, 5 polling places. And the polls will be open from polls will be open from 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. And if you have any questions about the election, please call the election board at 405-652-0195. That's 405-652-0195. Or email the election board at one word, election board at sno-nsn.gov. Again, all this information will be posted on the website and our tribal social media sites. Also, the Seminole Nation Transit Service will be offering rides to the polls. For more information about the Seminole Nation Transit Service, please call 405-294-3674. That's 405-294-3674. And they do have information on the transit rides and for being getting appointments for those things. All right, and then again this Friday we'll have a Assistant Chief Candidate Forum this Friday at 7 p.m. at the Kelly Haney Center. Be a Assistant Chief Candidate Forum. Seminole Assistant Chief Candidates will have meet and greet stations on site with council candidates allowed time for presentation. So if you're a council candidate, council member, council representative candidate, you'll be allowed time to have a presentation. So you go out there, check in. Again, it begins at 7 p.m., so you want to get there a little bit early and be a part of this event this Friday. And we will be broadcasting it, be a live stream from that as well. Elections, federal, Indian law, tribal governments, hand-in-hand representative for all this that we talked about. You know, this kind of goes in hand. Does this seem kind of familiar, old hat, to you there, Gary?
Yeah,
some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where we're at. We're in the midst of an election, and
right.
There's a lot of dynamics that go on with these things, and
I bet
it seems kind of familiar. So, I just want to give another introduction to you. Gary's here, providing some guidance for our Seminole Nation Tribal Historic Preservation Office, as they're working on self-improvement and doing some attending. I think it's called a TIPO monitor. Is that what
certification? Right.
Okay, and it's held at Seminole State College. It's ongoing till Friday.
No, Thursday.
Thursday's
yeah,
last
Thursday's
day.
Last day.
And so we met with him last night, and he was gracious enough to come and help us out here at Communications and make his way to our area. And thank you for bringing your daughter. And let me see if I can get this straight. And I'm going to see how my research is, so you can grade me on this.
Go ahead.
Mr. Gary John Montana is an attorney at law with over 30 years of experience. You received your BA in Political Science and American Indian Studies from the University of Minnesota and Juris Doctorate from Federal Indian Law from the University of Utah.
Yes.
Your journey has experienced nearly every area: tribal affairs, economic development, water rights, gaming, tribal courts, and development procedures and code drafting, hunting and fishing rights, gaming and finance development, elections, enrollment, gaming internal control development, constitutional revisions, and many other areas. You're currently the president and senior attorney for Montana Associates, LLC. Dedicated to the rights of Indian tribes on tribal reservations and other locations in the America. And you're doing consulting, training courses.
And, we do about 50 courses.
Wow.
Yeah. But we don't always, in a year get that done, especially with COVID. But
okay, and you're based out of let me see if I can get this
Osseo, Wisconsin.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And again, we'll put your information out, give you a little shout out too on our travel website, and give you with your web page and such.
Okay, great.
Let me see if I can do this. Bonjour et bienvenue, Gary. Do you understand French?
A little bit.
Okay. Yeah. I saw that, so I'm like, let me try that. Let me see if I can try that.
Parlez-vous français?
Parli Italiano poco.
Poco.
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time in Italian. That's over there by Sasaqua, Italy. Gary, what does sovereignty mean to you?
Well, sovereignty is what, we as tribes should be guarding, and cherishing. Sovereignty comes from who? The people. The inherent sovereignty of any tribe comes from the people, what we call in Lakota way, Oyate. And without the inherent sovereignty, the tribes would not be able to truly function the way they function today. So I think there's really a misconception out there when they talk about, how the tribal councils act, their authority. But all the authority in the Constitution is delegated from the people to the branches of government, whether it's the tribal courts, tribal council, whoever it may be. And I think people misunderstand that, thinking that the tribe or the tribal council are the ones that retain the sovereignty, but it's not. It's the people. And a lot of tribal constitutions that I've read and dealt with over the last 33 years, have dealt with or say within the Constitution, the substantive provisions that the General Council hereby delegates to the legislature or to the tribal council, to the courts, to the chairman's office, the following powers. So it's only through that sovereignty that we exist as a sovereign government. So even in situations where there's a clash between, for instance, the United States and the tribes, they're on equal footing because both is recognized as a separate sovereign. And that has been recognized by numerous Supreme Court decisions. So sovereignty is something we have to protect. And then if you really look at some of the policies that are coming out of tribes today, they're policies that probably do not support our sovereignty. I guess one of the issues you're dealing with is under the McGirt case. And if people are not familiar with the McGirt case, it said that the state of Oklahoma didn't have criminal jurisdiction over tribes and their lands, tribal members. And for some reason over the last, 100 years or so, you have acquiesced to the state's jurisdiction when really they didn't have jurisdiction. The only way a state has jurisdiction in the United States is if they're a public law 280 state, a 1953 act, that mandatorily gave states jurisdiction over tribal lands civilly and criminally. And those states were, I believe, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, California, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. Okay. Now, some states have taken on Public Law 280, but they've had to change their constitutions. And Oklahoma is not one of them.
Right.
So, how they got away with it for these many years is so now, instead of the state prosecuting for major crimes like murder, rape, and those things, the feds will come in and prosecute. So it's under federal jurisdiction.
What kind of response did you have upon seeing and hearing about the McGirt decision from your vantage point of where you were at when it came down?
Well, I think it was an exciting case, and everybody got excited about it, but, my knowledge of Indian law, I thought, well, I don't know, it's, first of all, I was kind of flabbergasted that the tribes in Wisconsin or in Oklahoma had actually gone on for so many decades thinking that the state of Oklahoma had jurisdiction, right? But then I thought, well, even though they don't have jurisdiction, the federal government does. So in McGirt's case, even though the state had to release him, the feds picked him up and transferred him to federal court where they tried him. And I think he's back in prison, but he'll be in a federal prison, not a state prison. So under the Major Crimes Act, if you're not a Public Law 280 state, the federal government has jurisdiction over crimes that are major crimes. That doesn't mean the tribe should not have major crimes on their book and prosecute for those things, because they too have jurisdiction. So it's called concurrent jurisdiction, and it deals with two sovereigns. Even though the feds can prosecute, the tribe can prosecute as well. A good example is that Peter McDonald,
Right.
who was a Navajo president. He was caught in, stealing from the tribe. So when that happened in the 80s, I think it was the late 80s or early 90s, he was put in, he was tried by the Navajo Nation, and he was put in Navajo tribal jail. When he was done with his sentence there, because they only could hold him for up to 5 years in tribal court or in tribal jail. I think at that time it was probably 2 years. The feds came in and they prosecuted him as well, and he went to federal prison. So two sovereigns, they're separate sovereigns, they can prosecute for the same crime, and it's not double jeopardy. So even though, if you have a tribal court here, and I don't know if you have a criminal code, because I'm not familiar with your codes, no matter what, the feds could try, you could try as well here at Seminole. Okay.
What are some friction points that you kind of see? And again, I look at it. I'm looking at asking if your experience from outside looking in but it all actually interrelates. As what are some friction points you can see for tribal nations in Oklahoma here with this
subsequent to McGirt? Well, you had law enforcement that was state. You relied on law enforcement to provide, safety, protection, and safety. I mean, I'm sure you still had tribal police, as well as they could be BIA if you didn't contract for them. Like my tribe, Standing Rock, we have BIA police, but I don't think we should. We should have tribal police. We should contract for that. But I'm sure now there is a gap. There's a gap in public safety, in the sense that you relied on the state for so long, and now after McGirt, they don't have jurisdiction. So now the question is, how does the tribe fill that gap in public safety? And they're going to have to, probably come up with more federal funding from the federal government to provide police, law enforcement. Their courts are going to be much busier. Their jails are going to be much busier. But, it's a great opportunity to protect the tribe's sovereignty. Law enforcement, protection of resources, protection of historic properties, what we call tribal cultural properties or traditional properties. That's all part of your sovereignty. And so, it's a great opportunity for the Seminole Nation to flex their muscles in the area of sovereignty and take over, law enforcement. I always say, would I rather be picked up by a state law enforcement agent or tribal? And a lot of times I would rather be picked up by a tribal, although there are some, kind of horrendous cases out there dealing with tribal police. It's part of your sovereignty. It's your territory, it's your jurisdiction, and you should enforce your laws within that area, not the state.
Something exciting that happened yesterday. We happened to be a part of it was kind of a first initial response to having specialty courts, specifically drug court yesterday. Right. A group was brought together of subject matter experts from within our programs and services, with one of our Supreme Court judges in our tribal court. And he had set up a drug court with another tribe. Right. And he experienced gave us his assessment of saying, hey, you guys, right now, the way things are, this is a good program because you kind of won't have to go through the building processes. We know you've got a good group right here that want to work toward that compassionate ending to try to help and rehabilitate. Have you seen, what are some examples of specialty courts that you've seen tribally that have been successful?
Well, I haven't really been involved in the drug courts, but I've heard of the drug courts, and there is federal funding for those courts, so it helps the tribe, with their expense and cost with running the drug courts. But, again, that's a way that we all have problems with alcohol. We all have problems with drug abuse. My personal experience is, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for 24 years. I was a functioning alcoholic, you know. My mother died from cirrhosis. You know, alcoholism is rampant in Indian country as well as drug abuse. You know, the question is, how do we solve those problems? And they're very difficult problems. You know, and drug court, you know, is a more, humane way of dealing with drug addicts, alcoholics, you know, that are continually have a revolving door, you know, with the judicial system. So, you know, tribes need to spend a lot of their money on treatment centers. You know, I have a son right now who's 38, and he's been on the streets for 12 years, 14 years, you know, and he's been in treatment numerous times. So, you know, alcoholism probably has touched every family, and drug abuse, every Native family out there, I'm sure. So, you know, other specialty courts I'm not really familiar with. You know, a lot of times you just have a hard time getting tribes to exert their jurisdictional subject matter and criminal jurisdiction in areas. You know, acquiescing to state jurisdiction is not an answer, you know.
What do you think the holdback is? Is it a fear, confidence? What is it just part of some of the...
Well, it's just like, you know, some tribes, you know, in California, you know, they think the BIA should, you know, oversee their enrollment and things like that because they trust them, you know. I mean, my experience with the BIA after 30-some years in practice, and I've solely practiced with tribes. You know, I've been general counsel for numerous tribes and written codes and everything, but it seems to me that, you know, the BIA, we always say, you know, we have a love-hate relationship with them, right? When we want them to come in, they don't come in, and when we don't want them involved in our internal affairs, they're involved, right? They won't get out. So I just think, yeah, it's a great opportunity for the tribe to pick up the gauntlet of criminal jurisdiction, you know, and civil jurisdiction. Of course, you add civil jurisdiction, and to run with it, you know.
Can you speak on some experience of Indian child welfare?
It's kind of a touchy area for me. I have a case right now where, you know, in Sisseton, where the Indian Child Welfare Act, the Indian Child Welfare Department is attempting to take a 4-year-old out of a home. But, you know, I think the Indian Child Welfare Act is, you know, a very important aspect. But sometimes tribes don't really understand that the Indian Child Welfare Act is supposed to be enforced in the best interest of the child. You know, and some tribes just rampantly intervene in cases, right, of neglect and abuse. Of course, the Indian Child Welfare Act doesn't apply to conflicts between natural parents. You know, custody disputes. It only applies to neglect and abuse cases, right, where the state has taken jurisdiction, or state taken the child out of the home. So, you know, I think Indian child welfare has its place. I think it's a great act, but if it's not being implemented in the best interest of the child, you know, I think that's problematic. So, I mean, if a child's been in a home for 4 years and she's 5 years old, you know, removing that child from that home is going to be detrimental mentally and probably physically to that child. You know, and I've seen that happen. You know, there have been good outcomes in the end, but can you imagine what that child goes through, you know, if they're removed by the Indian child welfare people and then, you know, put into a strange home? You know, you can still keep jurisdiction because tribes have exclusive jurisdictions in those cases, right, and still but leave the child where it's at until, you know, you make a good determination as to the best interest of the child. So, you know, Indian Child Welfare Act. I was adopted when I was like 4, I think, 3.5, 4. But I had been in and out of my home of origin 3 or 4 times, and, you know, there was abuse and there was alcoholism, and, you know, I was raised by non-Indians, you know. But my brother was raised by non-Indians too, and he lived right across the street from us. And he's a lawyer, and he graduated from Harvard. So, I mean, there are situations, you know, where the ending is good, you know, and it's with non-Indians. So, but I do believe in our culture and tradition, and I try to practice our culture and tradition, even though I was raised by non-Indians. You know, I try to speak my language. I try to participate in cultural affairs. So, you know, I don't think the Indian Child Welfare Act is the beginning and the end. You know, I think that there's a lot of situations that are unique, and you have to really look at them in a fact situation.
tell us a little bit about how you got your start in law. Where did that interest in law come from? Because that's the old adage, the most powerful Superman is an Indian with a law degree.
I don't know about that. You should tell that to tribal governments because they always hire non-Indians as their lawyers. I don't know.
Start.
I got my start. I always, I'm a Libra. Libra like the balance of the scales, right? I don't know. I was in the military for 6 years, the Navy. And I went in the year Saigon fell, so I'm an old guy. And I did a lot of courses on board ship. I was on the same ship for 4 years, a destroyer, on the Atlantic side. But I was on the Pacific side initially, But I did a lot of my coursework on ship. So when I got out of the Navy, I had a 2-year degree, And so then I went to the University of Minnesota, and my brother had already been to Harvard, Ron, and he was starting law school, and I was, at that time married to a Native woman from Cheyenne River, and she really, wanted me to succeed and wanted me to, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, So I used to say, come hell or high water, I'm going to get a degree in law, I told my kids, I tell them all the time, I worked all kinds of jobs when I was even in law school in the summers. I was digging ditches for cable companies. I remember my second year, I used to clean the theaters in downtown Salt Lake. We'd go in after the shows, and then we had to blow all the popcorn and, everything down to the bottom and clean it up. And I said I'd get home like 3 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd get up at 6 and I'd go to law school. So you have to be motivated, and that's why I try to tell my children, if you're motivated, you can do anything, if you're motivated, right? And if you really want something, my mother used to always say, if you really want something, Gary, and you don't get it, you didn't want it bad enough, right?
It's the truth.
So, I wanted to bring, my native wife from Cheyenne River, she used to say, you're so naive about Indian issues, because I always saw the good in everybody and the good in Native people. And, in my mind, they were still living in teepees and, everything was good, right? But I used to say, if I ever lost that vision of my people, I would lose hope. I'd lose the hope that I had to have as a lawyer to defend their issues, Yes. So, I wanted to help my people grow. And I wanted to protect them, And I still have, I'm 65 years old, And I've been through a lot of tribal battles, recalls, all kinds of things. But I still have that, that innate belief that, we should all be ekche, like we say in Lakota, ekche, common people, good to one another. You know what I mean? And, now, the way things are, I see Native attorneys should be thinking themselves as the last defense, because I tell my kids, inevitably we're going to cease to be as a people, because the constant intermarriage is going to delete our blood, and sooner or later, I see it at home where some of the tribes are run by what we call Iescas, The real Indians, traditional people, are still poor and living in the communities, and Standing Rock, where I come from, is about 90% unemployment. There are people that live on food stamps and, the other payment they get, which is
SNAP program.
Yeah, whatever it is. It's like $400 a month. How they live on that, I have no idea, So, and we need good leaders who really love their people and want to do things for them in a good way. Not in a selfish way.
What are some traits of good leadership that you've seen in some of your experiences? What are some, I heard you last night, and I followed him from afar, Leonard Crow Dog.
Oh, right.
And I just some of our leaders outside of our area, and when I heard you tell your story last night about your interactions with him, things like that. I've been in the military where I've had good leaders, and things of that nature. So there are some traits, but what are some traits that you see in making a good leader?
I think it's selflessness. It's that your love of your people overrides all other personal endeavors or personal needs and wants. They used to say, Sitting Bull would say that, my people love me. You know why they love me? They love me because I give them everything I have. Mm. You know what I mean? And Crow Dog, he was kind of a strange character in a lot of ways. I mean, my first Sundance was in 1981, I think. I had just been gotten out of I still was in the reserves, but I Sundanced down there, and I didn't have any eagle feathers. So here I'm sitting there. I don't know, the first round was over with, and I was sitting there, and here came those eagle feathers, Wombly, feathers down the line of men. And I said, where did these come from? And I later learned that Crow Dog had given them to me, and I used to swell with him in Minneapolis once in a while, because AIM started in Minneapolis on Franklin Avenue. And so I used to swell with him, but you had to be pretty rugged to swell with him, because he was hot. Okay, and if you ever went through a sweat with him and made it, he respected you. So I think a good leader is selfless. And they innately care about their people to a point where they'll do whatever it takes to protect them. But in our day and age, compromise cannot be a key word to leadership, because especially now where our sovereignty has been taken away, although we did have one good Supreme Court case recently at the Crow Nation, that held that the tribe had jurisdiction to prosecute a non-member who was an illegal alien, right, on a highway. So that was a big win. And even though we have a huge conservative court now, Gorsuch, out of 10th Circuit is always sided with Indians, But yeah, I think the most important trait is to be selfless, honest, and have integrity, and we read too many horror stories about tribal elected officials taking from their people, or bringing all the bacon home to their family and not, spreading it out. And I think that has to stop. We have to have checks and balances in our constitutions, and that's, we have these old constitutions. Some of them are new. I just read Potawatomi's today in class, and it seems to be a pretty good constitution. There's a lot of checks and balances, but the old IRA constitutions did not have any checks and balances. Now, there was a tribal council created by the people in the constitutions, and they're boilerplate, federal government boilerplate constitutions. And so the tribal council was given all the authority to govern, and a lot of times, there's no way to, if there is abuse, there's no way to counter that, because, usually your tribal court judges are chosen by the tribal council, or appointed, right? And I always, when I write constitutions for tribes, I always make sure that all the judges are elected by the people. So they answer to the people. They don't answer to the tribal governing body, legislature, right? They're separate. And so there's no checks and balances within tribal constitutions usually, under the IRA system. And that opens up everything to possible abuse, arbitrary and capricious action by elected officials. When you're a lawyer, you try to think, like, what's the worst case scenario that could occur if I write this document? Well, the worst case scenario could be that you get 5 or 6 people on council that are, dishonest and abuse their authority. So what mechanisms do I have in my constitution that counter that, where I can stop that, right? And if the only thing you have is recall, well, you could take them to tribal court, but what are they going to say?
Right.
Sovereign immunity, right?
Sovereign immunity.
But people think a sovereign immunity is a complete bar, but it's not. Because if they violate tribal law, they've acted outside the scope of their authority, and sovereign immunity does not protect them. And I have sued several tribes in federal court, but hopefully you don't have that scenario here. I was pretty impressed by your chiefs last night, although you didn't have a quorum, right? But, I was impressed by Rodney, and the other ones. The chief spoke, and I was impressed by him too. So, hopefully you don't have those problems. But I've never seen your constitution, so I can't really tell you, if it's a good constitution or a bad constitution.
And to even have it, a council have a general knowledge of the Constitution is very important.
Exactly. And that's what Rodney said. He said, you get elected officials, and they've never read the Constitution or your treaties or your laws. It's pretty hard to govern if they haven't, read those documents, because, that's very, very important, You might get elected, but there's a responsibility with getting elected, and that means you need to know your laws, internal laws of the tribe, and any federal laws that apply to you, and you should have good, in-house attorneys that really care about your people, So those are important things.
We got about a minute here left, Gary. I'm taking a quote here that I've seen. Think like a nation, not a reservation.
Right.
Can you finish up on that?
Well, think like a nation, because you are a nation. I always tell people in my constitutional law courses, just think like you're the only nation, you're the only people on earth, right? You're only people on earth, and if you think that way, then you'll act like a nation. You won't act like a reservation. You'll act like a nation. And if you believe in the inherent sovereignty of your people, then you will be a nation.
Well said.
Right.
Well said.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate that.
We could do this all day. I know you're busy, but we'll go ahead and close it out for this. It's the edition. Thank you over there. And let's close out this edition of the Seminole Nation radio program. Again, Hadam Chi Charlies, be nice to one another, be kind, and go out and do great, wonderful things. Seize the day.